Hello and welcome. This is the Well-Paid Geek from wellpaidgeek.com. Today you're going to learn about the ES6 arrow functions, also known as fat arrow functions, in under 10 minutes. This is one of the many features added in the 2015 ES6 update to the JavaScript language. If I get positive feedback about this video, what I'll do is over the coming weeks I'll do a video for each of the major ES6 and ES7 features. Please bear in mind, this is my first video. I'm not a voice performer. I've never done screencasting before. So just bear that in mind while you watch. Thanks. Okay, arrow functions. What are they? Arrow functions are a more concise way of writing function expressions in JavaScript. Let's jump straight into some code. I'll show you a standard function expression, then I'll rewrite it as an ES6 arrow function. Okay, so here's the code. We've got a very simple function expression here. What it does doesn't really matter. All that matters is how we go about transforming it into a fat arrow function. So we just have a variable again, call it the same thing, and again we assign the variable a function expression. But now, for an arrow function, we exclude the function keyword, and we just have the parameter list as the start of the function. Then, instead of just having the curly braces, we have our fat arrow equals greater than, then the function body wrapped in the curly braces. Exactly the same thing for the function body as with the standard function expression. And there we go. These two function expressions are now pretty much identical. Okay, at this stage, you'll probably be thinking, right, okay, this isn't very useful. These fat arrow functions don't really give us anything that standard function expressions in JavaScript do. In this particular case, I would agree with you. However, we'll now look at how arrow functions can be just a little bit better than normal function expressions in different circumstances. Okay, we've seen a normal function expression rewritten as an arrow function. However, arrow functions are much more useful and concise when there's just a single return statement in the function body. In this case, we can omit the function body entirely and just have an expression in its place. I'll show you what I mean by giving you a code example. Okay, so again, we have a really simple function expression. Here is even, and we'll rewrite this as an arrow function. Again, we start with parameter list, then the fat arrow, but now not the curly braces. If we have a case like this, where the entire function can basically just be summed up as a single expression, we can just do fat arrow, and then to the right of the fat arrow, an expression like that. Okay, so this version is much more concise. It's quicker to both read and write. It's essentially saying the function is a result of evaluating this expression with the function's arguments. This new functionality made people who do their JavaScript programming in a very functional style happy, because in functional programming, you're basically just declaring functions by saying this function is a result of evaluating this expression using the function's arguments, exactly like we do here. Just a bit of a caveat, say the expression you want to return is an object. Like say we've got an object like this. We can't just do fat arrow and then this object literal as our expression, because it thinks, because of the curly braces, we're going to give it a function body. This will error when we run it. In this case, if we do want to just return an object literal, we can force it to be evaluated as an expression as opposed to a function body by just wrapping it in parentheses. Just like that. That's now valid. Okay, I'm going to give you another example to show you where the concise, brief nature of arrow functions really come into their own. And the example is when we pass a function as an argument to another function and we define the function in place like we have here. So this is just a very simple click handler, and we'll just rewrite this to take an arrow function instead of a standard function expression. So that's it. Since we're just doing one thing, we don't need the function body. We can just put the console log straight in here. So as you can see, this is it just looks nicer on the screen. It's easier to type, easier to scan through when you're reading the code, rather than having all this extra stuff like the curly braces, the function keyword, having everything spread across multiple lines. It's not a massive win, but when you spend all your days writing JavaScript code, small optimizations like this are very useful. Arrow functions do have one important difference to normal function expressions. That is that it's the way arrow functions derive their context. Unlike normal functions, they don't need to be bound or called in a certain context. They will take their context from the current lexical scope. That means if you have a closure within an object's method, it will take the current value of this within that object's method as its context. If you don't understand the concept of context within JavaScript and what the this variable is and how to use it, you need to learn that before moving on to the next part of the video. Otherwise, you're not going to understand what follows. For those of you that do understand this, here's a code sample. Okay, so here we have a very simple class. In the constructor, we give it a single property prop with the value a property. Then we define an arrow function, which outputs this property, a standard function expression that outputs this property. We call the arrow function. We bind the function expression to whatever the current value of this is. So we'll operate in the context of the current object and then call it. And then finally, we just call the function expression without doing the binding. Down here, outside of the class definition, all we do is create a new instance of the class and then call context demo on it. Let's see what happens when we run this in the console. Okay, so there's an error, but before there was an error, the arrow function executes correctly, outputs a property. The version of normal, which is bound to the context of variable called t, the current object, that works correctly, outputs a property. However, we get, when we run just the function expression without binding it, we get cannot read property prop of undefined, because basically when we do this, we're calling normal in no context whatsoever. The value of this is therefore undefined, so we can't do this dot prop without an error. So yeah, this just makes arrow functions more useful when used as anonymous functions within a class's methods, because you don't have to bind it like you would previously with normal function expressions. Okay, that's it. You now know all about arrow functions. I hope you enjoyed my first ever video. Like it on YouTube if you want to see more like these. Subscribe to my new YouTube channel for other videos like this. And don't forget to visit my blog, wellpaidgeek.com, for more JavaScript and web development tutorials. Goodbye.